Good morning. It's great to be here in Gothenburg again. I love coming to conferences like this. I feel like I'm with my people when I can be here and speak with all of you. Thanks to Patrick for having us back. I am with Kandji. We're an MDM and device management and security solution for Apple devices. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Kandji. This is not a bait and switch, right? We are going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons this morning, but I do want to tell you just a little bit about Kandji. There's one cool thing I had to share with you, and that's assignment maps. This is the way that you build your deployment for your devices from beginning to end. You can visualize it left to right, and in these blocks, you've got your apps and configuration profiles and settings and certificates and things you need to deploy. So on the left, we start with all devices, get these items, the app settings, whatever that go to everyone. But then you can see on the right-hand block, right, if you belong to the marketing department or another department, you can assign certain apps just to that group. In the next section over, if the device has a certain attribute or it's tagged a certain way, you can assign items just to that set of devices. Then over here, we've got a scheme for deploying your OS updates. So if your device, if that user is part of the early adopters group, they're going to get forced to update to Sequoia very quickly on a very aggressive schedule to make sure you've got that canary group that's testing changes for you. But if they're already on Sequoia, they will get Sequoia updates on a reasonable schedule. If they're on Sonoma, they will have Sonoma updates enforced with a certain deadline, so on with Ventura. So you can design your whole scheme and assign the deadlines that you want to enforce for how quickly those updates will be installed. A really nice end user interface to guide them through that process. And then here at the end, if you're in a certain location, we could make sure you have the right printer in that location. Now, all of that comes together in this assignment map. You can see it. You can make it as big and complex as you want. We have some companies with 50,000 Mac that you've heard from doing this. But the coolest thing about this is up in the top left corner, the device lookup feature. So if you click into there, you can search your devices by the username, which I've done here, or device name. And then the Kandji will show you the path that that device takes through the assignment map to show you the items that are applied to it. Now, what's really cool about this is you can quickly visually see which items will get applied to that device. But the feature, the aspect of this that I love is that you can see what's not assigned to that device. That's something that can be really difficult to visualize or to find with some other solutions that I've used in the past, right? But here, it's not only easy to design your deployment from beginning to end, left to right, but it's also easy to troubleshoot your deployment, right? And see visually what's happening with a particular device. So that's just one thing about Kandji. If you want to learn more, you can come talk to us at our table outside. I'll be around. Eric's around. Jack Hollister, my colleague, Shava Fitzel. We'd be happy to talk to you more. Okay, but let's talk about fun stuff. Let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, this has been an important part of my life for a long time. How many people have played Dungeons and Dragons before? This is great. About half of the room has put their hands up. Like I said, I feel like I'm with my people when I come to these conferences. Maybe you got introduced through the artwork, Larry Elmore, this famous artist, maybe the cartoon show back in the 80s. More recently, Stranger Things had a D&D figure into the stories that were told there. And even more recent, there's this new generation of live play streaming on YouTube, like Critical Role, that have introduced other people to the game. But whatever it is that has introduced you to Dungeons and Dragons, one of the things I've always really enjoyed is just the process of creating a character. Rolling dice, designing this idea of a character that I'm going to inhabit and play with my friends in this fantasy world. And so I want to talk about how this process of creating a character has changed over the editions of the game. So in all editions, there's these basic core elements that are part of describing a character and who they are. They have ability scores. These are things like strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. Those are the 6 ability scores that describe what your character can do or how good they are at certain things. There is a race, and so you could be human, but there's fantasy races like elves and dwarves and orcs and gnomes and halflings and all that. And then alignment, like usually 2 dimensions, like are you a rule follower or neutral, or a rule breaker? Are you good or neutral or evil, right? And these elements are kind of the core of what describes a character. There's lots more, but that's kind of the foundational to it. And that you see in every edition of the game. In original D&D, which was released in 1974, it came from chainmail, which is actually a couple years earlier, which was a way to play with miniatures in a medieval setting, so with knights and that sort of thing. And then the innovation that Gary Gygax took from chainmail and brought to Dungeons and Dragons was the idea that you would inhabit a specific character and play that person in the game, and then they would progress throughout. And they borrowed some ideas from Dave Arneson, and that became Dungeons and Dragons. Now, the people who played Dungeons and Dragons, they're all in Geneva, and they called themselves grognards. Has anyone heard this term before? Okay, a couple hands, let the record show. A few hands have gone up. So grognards were folks that played war games, like miniature war games. So they would recreate the Battle of Waterloo, the Napoleonic Wars in the U.S., recreate the U.S. Civil War with miniatures. And so they'd play with different units, like artillery and infantry and cavalry, and recreate these battles. And they'd taken some of those ideas and applied them to this new type of game, role-playing game. But instead of organizing units and being the general that directed the units around the map or the board, you would inhabit this one specific character and play that way. But still, grognards was these old school miniature gamers that had come together to do something new. In the original concept of D&D, there's only 3 classes: the fighting man, the magic user, and the cleric. And they kind of corresponded to infantry, right? The fighting man, infantry, the wizard or the magic user as artillery that would sit in the back and fire big damaging spells at the enemies. And the cleric that was a utility player may have come into the game specifically to fight against vampires, because there was a evil player character at the table that was a vampire, and they needed a way to counterbalance that specific person. But still, clerics have come in with the ability to heal and be a support and all these other things, right? So that was the original game, just these 3 classes. You had ability scores. You would roll those first, and you roll 3 6-sided dice. And so the scores range from 3 to 18, and that determines your strength, constitution, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. And that was a gate to determine what class you could be. If you didn't roll high enough on your ability scores, you were prevented from playing a certain class. You had to roll high enough to qualify to play a certain type of character in the original concept of the game. Then you choose your race. You get some benefits and features from your race. Your, what class you are would be determined, again, by your ability scores. What choices were available were determined by your ability scores. And then you would pick your alignment. And certain alignments were required to play certain classes. And certain classes required a specific alignment. The basic set comes out in 1977. This is an attempt to package the game for retail and make it available to more people. And it kind of reconceives this a little bit. You still have ability scores, the same 6, 3 to 18, but race and class are combined. So there's human, elf, dwarf, hobbit. They changed that to halflings for some obvious trademark reasons. If you choose to be human, you could be a fighting man, or now it's fighter, cleric, or a magic user. But if you're a dwarf or you're an elf, that's what you are. That is your class. It's kind of an odd choice. Some people have said it's the worst decision ever in the design of Dungeons and Dragons, but there it is. And then alignment. First edition of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons comes out later that same year. And it cleans this up a little bit. Still have ability scores, 3d6. You pick your race and your class and your alignment. Classes now, there's 10 of them, including this concept of a subclass. You could be a fighter, but you could be a special kind of fighter, a paladin or a ranger. And you needed certain ability scores to qualify to be one of those special subclasses. If you're a paladin, for example, you have to be lawful good. That's the idea of a paladin, right? To defend honor and justice and truth and be upright and upstanding. It kind of led to this perception of paladins being a bit of pricks, really, right? Because they're so rigid in their belief system that you had to play a particular way. But, it's also a great archetype of a heroic character that would be fun to play. But this whole concept was a bit strict, right? That you had to follow these rules and your choices were limited sometimes by what the dice said about your character. The alignment system now has the full 9 choices on this 3x3 grid of lawful and good. And so there's some characters here that kind of represent, what lawful good might look like, or chaotic evil, and so on. This alignment system was also a bit rigid in that, like, certain races were meant to be a specific kind of alignment. So, like, orcs were always bad, right? This led to, a further restriction in choices, right? Drow, the dark elves that live in the underground kingdom of Menzoberranzan and worship the demon spider queen Lolth, right? They had to be evil. That's what they were. But you might know the story of Dritz Do'Urden, who was made famous in R.A. Salvatore's books because he was a dark elf that chose to be good. And that was a really interesting story for a lot of people. That brought a lot of people into the game. Now, you can imagine, like, in our modern sensibilities, the idea that a dark-skinned race was inherently evil, like, just didn't resonate with a lot of people. Even though this was fantasy, it wasn't explicitly designed to be commentary on the real world. It just didn't sit right with quite a few people. And having these rigid definitions made the game less fun for some. Second edition comes out in 1989. This is when I was in college, so this is the edition I personally spent the most time in. But this expands the choices of character creation quite a bit, right? Responding to these restrictions and limitations that are in there. Second edition makes character creation much more flexible. So you still have ability scores. You do those first. You pick your race, pick a class. There's similar number of classes, but it expands through lots of supplements. And second edition introduces this idea of kits, certain themes that you could apply to your choice. If you wanted to be a fighter or a wizard, what type of fighter are you? And you could assemble this collection of attributes and features and powers and skills and things that make it an interesting thematic choice. Pick your alignment, but now we've added more options, proficiencies and skills, and there's 20 or 30 different skills that you could learn. And so now you can mix and match. Yes, I'm a fighter, but I like the outdoors, and so I'm proficient, or I have lots of skills around being out in nature and surviving outside and hunting and tracking and whatnot. Or I'm a thief, but I used to study at a library and I know a lot about history and I have that skill in addition to being a thief. So this gave players a lot more options to kind of build a character to their liking and explore ways to tell different stories. So now we get to third edition, 11 years later, in 2000. And third edition takes this concept and just ramps it up even further. So still got ability scores, race, class, but now we introduce the idea of a prestige class. So this was actually present in first edition with the Bard. The Bard wasn't a class you could choose originally. You had to go through a progression and level up to a certain point, and then you could choose to play a Bard. And third edition takes this idea and expands it to all classes. So if you're a fighter, a wizard, a cleric, a priest, a druid, whatever, as you progress and get better, you could choose a prestige class that would give you even more capabilities, features, benefits, etc. You still have skills, but now we've added feats. And feats are these extra abilities that give you special powers in certain situations. They might make you really good at fighting with a great sword or an axe, or excellent with a bow and arrow. And you would choose feats to give you special bonuses in particular situations. And part of third edition was that there were combinations of feats that you could choose that would unlock prestige classes, and then these combinations would become very powerful. And third edition really rewarded players who spent a lot of time reading the rulebook and understanding the system and finding these really powerful combinations, which was a lot of fun, right? It sometimes led to a lot of lonely fun where you were designing your character by yourself, right, rather than playing at the table with your friends. But it rewarded those who had attained this system mastery and understood the system at a really deep, intimate level. And it kind of punished people who didn't, right? It sort of led to a situation where there was a right way to build a character, and there were some wrong choices about how to build a character. And if you came to the table with other people and you'd built a character that made some poor choices around how you built it, right, it might lead to some contention. It was made it a little less fun at the table, right, because you hadn't optimized. Now, that also meant you could level up in all these ways. Your ability scores would go up over time. Your class abilities would go up. Some racial bonuses, the bonuses from your feats and skills would go up over time. And so it led to this really wide range of power levels. So if you haven't played Dungeons & Dragons, which is maybe half of you, if you want to attack a monster, right, you roll a 20-sided die to see if you hit, right? And generally, you roll a 15 or something, you're going to hit. And so if it's really, really hard, an 18, 19, or 20, but you have bonuses that you can add to your roll from your class, from your feats, from your other features, right? In third edition, that range of bonuses went quite high. So you got to a point where you could add 10 to your roll, right? So to hit 15, you only have to roll a 5 on a 20-sided die. You could get a plus 15 modifier to your roll, right? And so the power levels really grew. And so it led to this wide disparity between the effectiveness of a character who was optimized with all the right combination of feats and features and skills and abilities, and characters that were not optimized. That gap was really wide. Fourth edition comes out a few years later, and it's not only a response to third edition, but also a response to what's happening outside of the tabletop RPG industry, specifically with computer games and things like World of Warcraft and other things that are coming on the scene. These wild combinations of feats and skills and powers and abilities in third edition is really hard to represent in a computer game. And so part of the idea of fourth edition was to try to make this more regular and create a system that had more structure so that it could be represented well in other games. So you could create something like Baldur's Gate 3, right, a computer game, and represent the rules in the game. So you still have race, but now class has this concept of structure around role and power source. So are you meant to do an area of effect attack that affects lots of people, or are you a striker that's going to deal a lot of damage to one particular target? Are you a support player? Whatever. That's your role. And all classes fit into one of these roles: striker, leader, defender, etc. And then the power source would be martial, like physical, arcane or divine. And so there's very regular combination of these things led to some structure for how classes were designed, but it also imposed a little bit of rigidity and limitation. Still have ability scores, skills are in there, feats, of course. Now we have powers, which are yet another choice to make about your character. Some are at will, you can use all the time. Some you can use in an encounter every time you have a fight during the day or a situation during the day, or some you can only use once per day. And so now you've got 3 different types of powers. There's lots of options. This continues to balloon and become even more complex. At some point, there are 55 different classes that you could play in 4th edition, and the way that a party goes is a bit different. And this is a bit divisive in the D&D community, this moment, because it's a departure from the way the game had been. And so now the term grognard, right, refers not only to the people who started D&D and came from miniature wargaming, but it refers to people who were kind of stuck in the past and wanted to continue playing the way they had always played and didn't want to adopt kind of this new way in 4th edition. And it's a bit of a split. That's where the Pathfinder game system comes from, is from people who wanted to continue to play 3rd edition the way that it was. Now we get to 2014, and there's a thought to sort of heal this divide and bring people together and take the best of all these different editions of the game and make something new that is more accessible and wider, available to a wider audience. And so the order in which you create a character has changed. So it's not ability scores first, right? We saw that in 4th edition. It's race, then class. You determine who you are, what kind of job you want to do. Then you roll your ability scores and assign those to your different attributes, your background, which again is something like your job before you became an adventurer. What sort of background did you come from? That gives you certain skills and abilities. So you get to mix and match, okay, my race, my class. Now I've got ability scores. I can choose a background that gives me additional bonuses or modifiers. And description includes my alignment, and I pick my equipment. So just this month now, there's another edition of the game. Now, it's not called 6th edition. It's generally just referred to as the 2024 rules. It's still 5th edition, I guess, but the 2024 version of 5th edition. And it's changed yet again, right? Class, but now origin. And origin is a combination of your species. They dropped the term race because of its connotation in the real world and just use species now instead. And it's a combination of your background and your species. And you mix and match these things to create the kind of character you want to be and be the person you want to be and tell the story that you want to tell. You still generate your ability scores, but we generally don't roll dice anymore. You have an array of scores that you can assign the way that you want. And so character power levels are a lot closer to each other. There's this idea in 5th edition of bounded accuracy, which limits the range of the numeric range of bonuses to a much narrower range so that characters are generally closer to each other in power. You can still be better than someone else at a particular thing, but the divide isn't so wide between an effective character and a non-effective character. And then alignment is still there and details, but you can mix and match these much more. So what have we learned? I think there's a couple of takeaways from this. Grognards and newbies, right? Grognards, if you like the way things used to be and you want to keep playing that way, you can have a lot of fun with other like-minded grognards, okay? But if you want to welcome new people to the table, you might want to consider adopting tools or ways of working or a philosophy that's more welcoming, more accessible to new people to come and join you at the table. Progression. This idea of leveling up and getting better over time is the fun of the game, right? And what people like about D&D is this ability to level up. And I think that's what we enjoy in our personal lives as well. And this idea of imposing restrictions on you can't get there because of where you started is not fun. But being able to progress and grow and add to your skills and abilities is. Never split the party, okay? Every person has a role. Building a team of people that are proficient in their role and contribute to the overall group is fun. Finding a way to build a party that is having fun together and helping each other, that's fun. Find ways to do that. And then lastly, great characters make great stories, right? The change over time in D&D and the way you make a character is to make it more fun and to make interesting characters that tell the kind of story that you want to be without imposing limitations on, hey, you can't be here because of where you came from or who you were before or what the dice determined at birth or whatever it is, right? You can come here and be part of the fun and grow and learn together and make a great character. And great characters make great stories. I love coming here to Max Sisselman because I love hearing your stories and where you've come from and the interesting ways in which you've come to the table and formed a party and gone out adventuring in our industry in a way that's unique to you, but has created a great story. If you'd like to come by and talk to me, I would love to hear your story. We're doing a raffle tomorrow during the mid-morning break. We're going to give away some D&D related stuff, and we'd love to see you there. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.